Again, allegedly a contract was put on him and a guy took it up and stabbed him to death in the unit. After that, I suppose when I got my throat cut, that we took him back. Then within 20 minutes, I felt someone grab me from behind and he had the old toothbrush with the razor blade melted in it and just slit my throat from there across. In the early days in Scarborough North, we used to find guys, you'd actually see the imprint of shoes on their head, they'd be stomped. And he actually said to me, he said, I'll never fucking come back to jail, so even though it was awful, he learned a good lesson, but people have no idea about how savage it is in there, David.
All that talk to my gang pull up and we pull up and they all did.
Yo, it's your boy King Dave here, and this is the Fallon Show. Hope all is going well. How about you introduce yourself, man, and what you used to do for a living?
Yeah, my name's Paul O'Sullivan. My history is I worked at maximum security prison at Port Phillip for 20 years, from 1999 to 2019.
20 years.
Met David there.
Yeah.
Met a lot of guys there. So, that's pretty much it.
Yep, that's where me and Paul here met. So, of the years that I spent incarcerated in Melbourne there, the large majority of it I spent at Port Phillip prison there. I met Paul here originally in Charlotte unit, so that's solitary confinement. So that's the bowels of the prison, I guess you could say. So that's where me and Paul met, and over the years, let it be known though, I wasn't a big fan of correctional officers. Over the years I had assaulted a few, bloody thrown piss at them, food, all sorts of stuff like that. But no, me and Paul here were actually all right. So so Paul, man, thank you for jumping on, man. Really appreciate this, to be honest.
No, anytime, David. You're a good man, and I could see that in you, and it's good to see you moving ahead with your life.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So how about you start us off, man? So you started working 1999, was it?
Yeah.
So what sort of led to that?
Just the conditions, I never had any dreams of doing that as a job, but they gave you 8 weeks annual leave, 10 weeks sick leave, and it was good pay. So for me in those days, like a job, it was all about what benefits you got, and I liked them, so I did it. And it was the best thing I ever did. Like the 20 years there were good. You meet so many different people from all walks of life. It opens your eyes to a lot of things. You do, like, you learn so much about people. So, yeah, it was a good job for me.
So how was it when you did sort of start there?
It's intimidating. When you start, the first time they take you into the jail, all the blokes line up on the fences, just start throwing, abuse at you, insults. Some of them are pretty clever. Like, you're going through and there's a whole bunch of you in the white shirts and the grey pants, and it's just open slather. Like, guys are just trying to outdo each other with the best insults. And like I said, some of them are good. You get used to being called a maggot, a dog. So when they come up with something different, it's pretty good. But then after a while, it's like any job, David, it just becomes a job. And, as you get to know the guys, the insults get less. You still get them. Like, if you do a 12-hour day and you haven't been insulted once, you haven't done your job. But most guys are good guys. Like you talk to them about footy, the boxing, the mixed martial arts, anything. And
how did it change, man? Coming from, back in 1999, there would have been a lot of hard guys in the system at that time, the whole Melbourne underbelly scene, so how did that change over the years, man?
It was taboo to be seen talking to the screws in those days. We used to warn the guys, like, if, they come in, they didn't know anyone, and they'd talk to you, ask you questions, and you'd have to tell them, look, you shouldn't stay here because, all the other guys don't like it. They don't know what you're saying. In the early days, most of the guys, like, there was their own social standing. The bank robbers were high up on the pecking order, because that was seen as, what the hard guys did. And everything else sort of came in underneath that. So if a guy come in and he was a bank robber, he got a lot of respect off the other prisoners and that. And it just changed, and to this day, when I left, it was more of the different nationalities and the gangs, and the old days of, a guy coming in, he's just a hard guy, have gone. You've got to hook up with someone. So that causes a lot of trouble, because then you've got to keep people separate, which I think is probably the hardest thing, trying to keep, all these guys that have got blues with each other apart. That's just, well, it's impossible. As you know, like, visits is meant to be off limits for guys to play up, but you're still mixing guys who absolutely want to get at each other. So, sometimes in the back of visits where the guys get changed, that it'd go off, but most of them respected the visits as, no, we don't do it there. But anywhere else was just open slather, like, if they saw someone they wanted to get him, they just get him, and it was on.
So for those that don't know, so Port Phillip prison is maximum security there in Melbourne and Victoria. The largest prison in the state. By all means, the shittest prison in the state as well. The shittest food, shittest sort of movements, so that was the place for the fuck ups, really. So that's where I spent most of my time again, incarcerated in Melbourne, also known as the place with the most drugs, usually. Most sort of politics going on.
I thought Port Phillip was okay. I know all the crooks used to call it Port Putrid, which I found funny, but I knew the meals weren't much good, because we dish them up in Charlotte, and you wouldn't dish it to anyone.
Yeah,
but it's all you had, so you've got to give it out.
You wouldn't dish it to your dog,
No.
mate. I'm telling you. That's how I feel for the boys now when I speak to them, because I want to tell. Because since I've been out, I stopped eating meat, stopped eating dairy. So like, when I look back to the stuff we used to eat in there, I'm just like, whoa, bro, fuck that.
Well, if you didn't have your cook-ups, it would have been.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hey, in those early years, man, who was sort of the hard guys that you had come across, man? Working in Scarborough North, Scarborough South, so that is sort of known as the Bronx part of Port Phillip. That's pretty much the lead up to Charlotte and Borrowdale, and sort of the management units. So who were some of the old school dudes you had come across? Can you say? Or?
The guy who sticks in my head the most is Mark Smith, just because the other crooks all went out of their way to talk to him, and every single one of them would tell me how hard he was in Pentridge. And it was lucky I built up a good bond with him, where if Mark ever did anything, they'd call me to go and talk to him, because when I worked in the gym, we gave Mark an open contract to come whenever he wanted, just to keep him calm. There was Slav Perserapep, who was obviously, a European guy, but he carved a big Z in the door of his cell. And when he cleaned his cell, like in Scarborough North, they used to all sit underneath the top tier, and he'd just sweep his cell out on top of all the other crooks, and no one would challenge him. Like, and to do that shit in jail, you've got to be a hard man. But, whether he'd get away with it now with all the, the different gangs and that, I doubt it. But in those days, it was sort of one out. But
so it has changed a little bit nowadays. So the gang culture is a bit more.
Yeah, you wouldn't have. Guys like Danny Heaney, John McKinley, Shane Miller, Jamie Whelan. Jamie Whelan was someone who had a lot of balls. He died in jail, which was sad, because when you got to know him, he was what could you say, just a fair dinkum guy. Like, he was what he was, hard man.
Stand up bloke. So what about some of the hectic sort of stuff that you would have seen, man, over your time in prison, man? So it would have been, one or two murders, at Port Phillip.
And he got stabbed to death in Scarborough North over what he'd done to get put in jail. They'd shot a market gardener who in those days was all hooked up, with the Melbourne mafia. And again, allegedly a contract was put on him and a guy took it up and stabbed him to death in the unit. That was bad because I actually liked the guy. For those days, I always found him funny. He'd always have a funny thing to say to you. That was the first murder I'd ever seen. So that was a hard one. You remember that. After that, I suppose when I got my throat cut, the guy had come up to me and said he was going to hurt someone or hurt himself, which meant you take him up to the psych nurse. So I got permission to take him up. I took him up. At the end of it, he wasn't happy because the psych nurse wouldn't keep him in the mental ward, St. Paul's, and he said on his way out, just watch what I'll do, and he warned the psych said, just take him back. We took him back. Then within 20 minutes, I felt someone grab me from behind and he had the old toothbrush with the razor blade melted in it and just slit my throat from there across. Pretty good, and with the white shirts, the blood shows up bad. So from what I found out later, it was premeditated. The guys wanted one of the screws to be got and he just got me. But what happened after that, all I did was I stayed there to try and lock them down, which they wouldn't. They were out till about 11 o'clock, 11:30, because they'd all armed up. A few of them locked down, but most of them didn't. They barricaded the stairs because the crook who did it was up there. And I was trying to get up there. He was standing with a bloke called Stephen Asling, who was in the gangland wars. Like, he got charged with shooting Graham Kinniburgh. Whether he did or not again, I don't know. But I had a bit of a history with Steve because after that, he was one of the guys I boxed with in Charlotte, years down the track, and it was funny talking to him about that.
Yeah, all right, so I guess moving on. So you mentioned how you were boxing in Charlotte. So again, how me and Paul here met. So Charlotte is the slot, they call it the slot, long-term management. So yeah, basically you go there for fucking up. So that's pretty much the end of the line there. Most people don't go down there for long though, only a couple of weeks, but if you're while you're down there is bad enough, then you'll get put on long term, and then you'll stay down there for sometimes years, so again, my time at Port Phillip, I spent a lot of time down there going into years, and that was where I met Paul here. So Paul actually used to come down on his lunch breaks and used to hold the pads for us and that. So, a little picture of Charlotte. So you get under 2 hours out of your cell each day by yourself in a cage, or concrete walls, wire mesh on the top, pigeon shit everywhere. Sometimes there's dead pigeons on the top on the grates and they just leave them there. So, over my time there, I've seen people break down there, people go cuckoo, man, all sorts of stuff, man. I lost a bro down there. One of the boys died down there, unfortunately. He was bringing in drugs. The balloon burst in his stomach, and he tragically passed away down there. And he had been there for 2 years as well. And he was only 21 when he died. So the last 2 years of his life, all he saw was that cage, that solitary confinement, so it's a tough place, man. Again, people lose their minds down there, and Paul used to come down and give us a little bit of relief, man, being able to sweat it out, even though it was only like 10 minutes, but it meant a lot, you know what I mean? So what led you to do that, man, to come down there like that out of your own time? And
because I was working in there, and guys talk to you more. Like if they're on a single run out, they're not mixing with anyone, you talk more, you'd find out about what they've done. You'd see them locked up in a yard, for an hour or 2 hours now, I think it is. But And it's just shit. And you just think if there was something I could do, and instead of just saying, I thought I should do something. So I got permission and I said, look, I don't mind coming down, holding pads, putting them through exercise programs. And, they okayed it. So we did it, and it went from there. I started coming in on my days off, and people would say, why would you do it? I said, I enjoy it. Like, you go and for a start, you're talking to the guys on their level. I'd be locked in the yard, and because I'm helping them, they'd talk to me more. And it makes the job easier.
God, what you did in Charlotte there was appreciated, man. Like, for me, like I said, I didn't have the best views of prison officers. But, Paul here, I used to call you Paul, so that's saying a lot, in Melbourne, you usually call him boss or whatever, which means bag of soggy shit. So it's an insult, but, I used to call you by your first name because, just for doing things like that. Don't get me wrong, there was always that line though, but yeah.
Yeah.
So you touched on it before, sort of that prisoner inmate relationship. So, obviously me, I've moved on from all of that stuff, but back then, when I was in prison and things, you touched on it about how, sort of talking with inmates and things can be difficult. I must admit myself, when I was in there with the boys and that, like, we would, because everyone's always watching in there, so if we were in the unit and we would see things like maybe another inmate talking to the officers for too long. I mean, a lot of the times it won't end good for him. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as he gets back to his cell, we'll be waiting for him, to ask him what the hell he's doing. If I'm like, this is, obviously for me, this is a past life, but in there, that is how it was. So, I mean, like, how was that though? You know what I mean? Say for you, so like, with was that tough, knowing that sort of that prisoner inmate sort of thing, if you see the inmates doing it tough, and was that sort of hard knowing that there's that line? And
yeah it was, like, because honestly, David, and a lot of guys who come in are scared stiff, if they don't know anyone and they go in and you are the only ones that they can talk to, and people have to talk.
yeah.
So, yet, if you were smart enough to understand, the guys can't talk to you, so it's hard telling them to go away, and you can't go to his cell later because that's a red flag. Like, so you'd end up just saying, like, look, mate, for your own safety, just go away. Don't come here. And you'd see them, and then they'd go back, just sit in their cell, and you'd honestly, you feel like, you're the biggest cunt in the world for doing that. Like, but you knew that, because I'd seen it, like, in the early days in Scarborough North, we used to find guys, you'd actually see the imprints of shoes on their head, they'd be stomped. And I remember this one guy who was a builder come in. He'd made a blue just once in his life. Like, he'd gone through one of those drive-through hardwares, and he decided that it would be an easy place to break in. He'd get all his stuff. And anyway, he was a big guy, big solid guy. He come in, he had attitude, and he was trying to bring his stuff in. And we said to him, "Don't bring that in here. You won't keep it." He said, "Fuck that. I can look after myself." And we tried to tell him, said, "Mate, they don't fight fair here. Jail's jail. It's not. You're not going to stand there and punch on it. That's not how it works." And anyway, that night we found him. He'd been absolutely battered. He was the one I found shoe prints on his head. I shouldn't laugh, but you could actually see the size 12 like stomped on his head. And but the funniest thing about that was he learned, and he actually said to me, he said, "I'll never fucking come back to jail." So even though it was awful, he learned a good lesson. But that so easily can turn into like death.
Like, this is, the harsh realities of prison, because it isn't fair in there. You know what I mean? Like, when I was in prison there again, a lot of the times, would be me and the gang, would be standing in there, watching the newbies come in. And, Yeah, it isn't always like this, as Port Phillip, people get moved around if they see that a gang's getting too strong or whatever. But a lot of the time, if we would wait on the tier and wait for new guys to come in, and like if you walked in and you didn't know anyone, you know what I mean? Like, fair enough, if you knew someone in the unit, then you'll be all right. But if you walked in and you didn't know anyone, man, pretty much everything that you've just walked in with, you won't be leaving with. You know what I mean? It's just as simple as that. And it isn't fair. You know what I mean? Even though I was a part of all of that, I look back on it now and it isn't fair, because it doesn't matter how tough you are, just like you said, you can't go against the unit, you know what I mean? So it
No,
is,
and
yeah,
people have no idea about how savage it is in there, David.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, like I've had a knockabout life, like, but honestly, it opened my eyes, the way guys are going and just cave someone's head in and just, like it was just savage. Like, but then, you're fighting to survive in there. So you're either up the top of the tree or the bottom of the tree. There's no one in the middle.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's what causes the gangs now, because years ago, like a long time ago, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, you only had white guys, Asians, and the Koori guys, and that was it. Then slowly over the years, the Middle Eastern guys, the Islanders, the last 5 or 6 years, the African guys, have come in, and in numbers, and that just causes people to band together, because you obviously bond with your own people more. And I don't know where it ends. I don't, because you with the motorcycle clubs, and I know at Port Phillip, we had the different clubs in all different areas, all locked off from each other. But that's a Band-Aid. You can't keep them apart. And if they want to get each other, they're gonna. Like in the gym, they had a big blue between the Comancheros and the Bandidos.
Yeah, you would have seen a few balls down there at the gym.
The worst thing in the gym is you had push-up bars, you had things that could be used as weapons, and it was amazing to me that nobody got hurt in that one.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So the gym is basically one of the only chances at Port Phillip for people to meet up and things. Because like I said, Port Phillip, it is quite fenced off, and that, not everyone can just mix together. So the gym is one of the hot spots if you're allowed to get down to the gym, because most of the time it was closed off, because of fights and things like that. But what about like self-harm, suicide? You would have come across a fair bit of that.
It's always hard, David, and some guys are so measured in what they do. In one of the units, a guy had slashed up, but he'd set up little buckets so that the blood didn't go anywhere but in the buckets. And, in your head, you're thinking, I can't get how much thought he must have put into that to be able to, think about not making a mess. And and then other guys, there was one in Charlotte down the spine. He tied plastic bags around his head so hard that he sucked the bags right down his throat. And you just think, how determined was he to die? Because, you could have ripped him off, but he didn't. And when they got him out in the morning, they had to pull the plastic bags out from down his throat, and you just think that's where the system has made a mistake, because obviously that guy shouldn't have been there if he was in that way.
Yeah.
Because, you see a lot of guys try to do it, but then they bail out at the end. But these guys have done it in such a way, and you think, God, how sad they must have been to do that. And, but when they closed all the mental institutions, for the intellectually disabled guys, that was shocking too, because we had guys, and you would have seen them, they were locked up in Marlborough, but if they were too out of control, they'd come to Charlotte. And these guys had the intellect of a 6-year-old. And you can't punish them. Like, punishment only works if you're being punished. And we had guys down there that were really only little kids, you know, big hulking guys, but, you know, the mentality of a little kid, like they needed to be with psychologists and nurses, not with screws and locked up. And,
Yeah,
you know, because the
especially in
worst thing
those.
down the spine is how the other guys burn everyone who comes down, you know, and, you know, you're burning a guy and then they kill themselves. It's when you know, like punishment only works if you know what you're being punished for. But
So again, like I said, so that's back in Charlotte there. So when you first get to Charlotte, you go down the EPA, it's called. So you go down the spine there, and as you get loss of privileges for 28 days, and it's loud down there. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So again, when I was there, you know what I mean? Like we used to stay up for days just yelling and banging, and like now when I look back, it's like another life, you know what I mean? But if I'm honest, you know what I mean? Like when I was down there, you know, me and the boys, we would just bang like animals, screaming just for days, you know, just because that's what happens when they treat you like an animal, you end up becoming one. You know what I mean? So
oh,
we just
exactly.
used to bang on the doors, and no one would be no one would be able to sleep, and people would break, people would start slashing up and things like that. Like you said, a lot of mentally unwell people down there, and
Yeah, and the system makes them worse. That's the
the
worst thing.
system makes them worse. Yeah, so it's like the spine was a lot of prisoners were scared to go down there. You know what I mean? Because of, you know, we were just crazy down there, man, during that time in my life. You know. So what about like you know, during your time at Port Phillip, you know, with like sort of corruption type things, you know, all sorts of corruption, I guess, you know, within G4S, and you know, prisoner mistreatment, things like that.
Officers are human, you know, and uh, they have the same vices as anyone. So they need money, you know, and money's the root of all evil. You know, they bring in stuff, but what you know, you taught this, and they should have been smarter. You taught at the very start that don't bring in stuff for prisoners, because once you do it once, you're fucked. You'll have to do it again and again. And people still do it, you know. It's an ongoing thing, you know, and it just comes back to it's just sheer people wanting stuff that, you know, that are beyond their means, and they just see a way to do it, and they make a bad choice. Like I don't judge people on it, because you've got to be in their shoes to understand why they did it. It's the same as the female officers that, you know, step over the line with the male prisoners. I don't judge them on it, because you're human. But the one thing they should all do is the minute they cross that line is they should leave that job, you know, because if you're fair dinkum about having a relationship with a prisoner, well, leave the job and make it, you know, where it's not all behind, because you are going to get caught, you know, and you know, just damages people. But, you know, like I said, everyone's human, so this shit happens. But it was funny. One guy, when I first started, he always used to say to me, I'll do anything for the officers, nothing for the crooks. And he ended up in jail because he was selling guns and shit on the outside. But you think, I wonder if he changed his attitude when he went to jail. I bet he did. We had one, and again, I won't go into any names, but he got taken away from the jail in handcuffs because, as it turned out, he was having sex with his daughters, you know, like raping them. And he was one who hated the prisoners, like would go out of his way to make everyone's life miserable. And, you know, you just, you know, to me, he deserves everything he gets in jail. Like, you know, I've got no time for people who do that sort of stuff, you know, to any young kid, like, let alone your daughter. Like,
Yeah, no,
you
that's
want to play up
putrid.
with little kids.
Yeah, no, that's
And
putrid.
that's where it's hard for the prisoners, you know, you see them, you know. I know when we got the guy who threw his kids off the Westgate, the other guy who drove into the dam with his kids. And every time they go through, the main part of the prison, they get baked and burnt. But to me, there's not enough you can do to them. And the jail protects them, which they have to. You've got to understand that. If it's your job, it's your job. Like, I'm 100%. If that's your job, you've got to make sure nothing happens to them. But it goes against every part of your body. And that was why I didn't work the protection units, just because of, I don't think I could have dealt all day with some of the sickos in there.
So I'm even like with the privatizations of the prison. So Port Phillip isn't actually owned by so a lot of people actually don't realize the big dollars that are involved in the whole prison industry. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of money to be made in housing prisons, housing prisoners, transporting prisoners. You've got the whole industries, so G4S, who owns Port Phillip, they make a lot of dollars, so they actually profit from people going to jail, so,
It's one of the industries that should never be private, David, because when you're a private company, you answer to your shareholders. They set up a private company to make money. They do the best they can with what they've got, but they've also got to spend the money so the shareholders get the money. It should be run by the government, because that way you could honestly bring up things, and money should never be the most important thing. But if you're running a private business, you want to make money. So to me, it should always be done by the government. It should be controlled by the government. A good friend of mine was sacked because the guy they were sending him out on escorts with didn't have a gun license. No one from management got sacked, and yet they'd given him the gun, and they sacked my mate because he went with him. And you think, the thing that ate at me, and I was lucky enough to have a big meeting with the big boss of G4S, and I told him that. I said, that was just shocking, because you're sacking the shit kickers, but you leave management alone. Now, if you're managing a jail, how can you send someone out with a gun who hasn't got a gun license?
Yeah.
And yet they sacked anyone who'd gone out with him. None of the soups, none of the managers got sacked. Just, you see stuff like that, and you just think that's people just trying to cover their ass.
All right. So, so 20 years, man, 20 long years at Port Phillip. So why'd you end up leaving, man? And what did you sort of end up doing with yourself?
Sorry, the dogs are swarming.
No, all good, all good.
Yeah, 20 years.
So why'd you end up leaving?
But I'll tell you honestly, Dave, I met so many good people, like both sides. I feel like towards the end of my time there, I was probably seeing too much of being on the prisoner side, which you should never be. You've got to be fair in everything you do. But that's sort of when you need to get out. So I got out, started a business. I bought an existing business. Then we got smashed with COVID. Like, I was selling boxing gear and martial arts gear. And it would have been a really good life, but everybody I know in that line of work now is struggling, because all the gyms are virtually not open over here. I believe everybody should work in a prison at some stage, just to open your eyes to, one, the conditions, two, you get to see, things, and then you can honestly comment on whether prison's the right solution. For a lot of people, it's not, because, as you know, prison is where you meet all the other guys. And for the young guys coming in, I honestly think it actually teaches you how to be a criminal more than, the rehabilitation I don't believe in, but because I think guys turn it about when they can.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm a big believer in that. There's pretty much no rehabilitation in prison. It's pretty much just you yourself, when you just hit that point of realization. But it's just unfortunate, as you got guys in their 60s in jail, man, still acting like teenagers,
Yeah. But it's all fake. I think if you went into guys' cells when they're locked up on their own, you'd see a lot more of how they actually feel. Like they're losing so much, you know. The old guys used to say to me, you know, they don't do the prison, their families do. You know, they're used to it. Goes back to that guy, Mark Smith. He used to tell me, you know, prison's nothing. You know, it's our families that suffer, and that's where you need to look at it. You know, you're taking fathers away from their children and their wives. We need to have a good look at it and change it. There's a lot of things that need to change.
Yeah, no, 100%, man, 100%. You know, even though, you know, yeah, it is the families that pay in the end. But you know, with prison, you know, it's like you got to put that mask on, you know what I mean? And in prison, you become really good at it to be able to hide the pain and say that it's nothing and all of that. You know, I used to do that myself, but after being released, you know, it was a struggle, you know, to adjust to life again. You know, had a lot of mental scars from my time in prison that I was hiding. You know, so it's just a lot. And then, you know, when criminals do get out, then the community suffers, you know what I mean? So it's just the only people really that win in the end are people that make money off of it, you know, which is it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but yeah.
It's hard. You'd see guys on the phone, you know, they're trying to phone their missus and she's not home. And, you know, they always think the worst. So then they have to go back to their cell and they've got to sit there until, you know, another 24 hours because before they get another call. Missing, you know, they might get locked up and their wife is pregnant and they miss that, you know, it's, you know, missing funerals, like just stuff like that. It's, you know, it's just, I couldn't even understand it, you know, and I did it for 20 years, but again, I just think they need to be vetted better. And as soon as they can be an asset to the community, give them a chance. That's all I'd say is give them a chance.
All right, Paul, I think I'm gonna wrap it up there, man. But man, it was good catching up again, man. It's been a couple of years since I've been out. It's been over 2 years now, so it's been good to see you again, man.
No, when I saw your podcast, David, I thought, you know, that's just fantastic. You know, that you picked yourself up, got yourself in that position. You could have easily just given up, you know, when you got deported, because that's a huge, you know, kick to you. But, you know, it's just credit to you that you've manned up and, you know, you're doing what you're doing now. I just wish you all the best. I hope this kicks off and you really make a good life and a living out of it.
Yeah, nah, thanks for man. I appreciate that, man. Don't get me wrong, I've been to hell and back, but I've come out the other side, man, for sure. Wishing you all the best, man, and we'll talk soon anyway, huh?
Thanks, Dave. I'll stay in touch.